The question I asked the other day was, do you believe you are overweight because you inherited your parents' genes, genetics? They're overweight and that was passed on to you. And I'm going to tell you, that's a real belief that people have had for years and years, all the way back to the 80s when I first started my career. People would come to me and say, I got it from my dad, I got it from my mom, so it's going to be harder for me to lose this weight. And there was nothing to dispute that back then. So people already had a block up that they were going to have more of a struggle losing weight because their family history was my mom, my dad, their mom and dad, everyone was overweight in their family. So fighting that mental block was one obstacle, and then we actually had to do the work, but we always found a way to actually start losing weight and most importantly, keep it off. So back in the day, it was more of a struggle because they came in already with the mentality that I've got the fat gene from my mom and dad. Modern day, probably about 10 years ago, that was debunked. Scientists across the world, now that we have all of these DNA tests and all this technology that's way above my pay grade, they have proven there is a percentage that you can blame your mom and dad on for why you're overweight, genetic-wise. You know what that percentage is? 2%. They have found that 2% of genetics plays a role in why people are overweight in regards to family history, my mom and my dad. And that was very disappointing, I think, for a lot of people because then they realized one thing, which came from me, is it came from lifestyle, okay? What you inherited was a lifestyle, a familiarity of how people would eat in that family household. And that was passed on through generations. And a lot of times you've heard about the generational curse in other areas of life. This holds true here also. Whatever you learned as a child from your mom and dad who were overweight was passed on to you. And you believe this is the way that people eat. How about the old saying, eat everything on your plate? I was taught that. Don't leave anything on your plate because there's people in the world that are starving. That was a big trait that was passed on from generation to generation to generation. Well, I broke that curse with my kids and say, hey, just eat until you're full. If there's leftovers, that's the way it is. But that's just one of many things that was passed on through the generations. So back to the genetic gene. My family's overweight. It was passed on from my family and my grandmother. You can account for 2% as that being the reason. And Google this information, by the way. This is out there. Scientists across the world have proven there's only 2% excuse for why you're overweight based on your parents being overweight. The lifestyle, what was on the plate, is the culprit. So with that being said, I feel that's a blessing for people to know that because they can release that block that I'm already going into this, backed up against the wall because I inherited these genetics. You did not. You inherited 2%. So now let's get busy, eating proper portions, get moving, exercising, and have an amazing life. Hope this helps you. Love you guys. I'll talk to you soon.